In the politest way possible, if you see a female character whose design is unconventional and your first thought is, oh, it's a bad design because she's not hot, you should probably start thinking harder about certain things. Let's talk about absolute Harlequin, the evolution of her punk aesthetic more generally, and working class anti-racism. Now, before we get into it, I do just want to say I am not expecting everybody to like this design or this aesthetic. That within itself is personally fine. However, if your only critique is that you dislike it because she's not hot, this is a teenager. Let's start there. I don't think I should have to explain to you guys why it's kind of weird to demand hotness from a teenager. So even if we're looking just at skin-deep different punk aesthetics, it is worth noting that since this controversial and pretty horrifically messy New 52 design, Harley Quinn has been presented to some degree with elements of punk aesthetic, punk subculture. The Palmiotti and Connor redesign, which we got in later New 52 and Rebirth, is arguably now her most popular design. It was what was riffed on in the original Squad film, which had her pushed more heavily into pop punk, but as Bruce Timm said of this roller derby aesthetic, it has an element of punk rock to it. If we look at the way that Harley has been presented in not necessarily main continuity comics, but the swath of young adult original graphic novels, she has been frequently presented in a soft punk aesthetic with counterculture leanings. I don't think it's necessarily too far off to say that the general public's understanding of Harley Quinn is to some degree that of a manic pixie punk girl or manic pixie riot girl. In main continuity, they have very much kept her on the side of conventionally appealing within that punk aesthetic. I'm going to loop back around to talk specifically about how this applies to absolute Harley Quinn, but let us talk about skinheads. Now, the general public perception of skinheads these days is largely of the nasty working class British racist form, but that was not the origins of either the fashion or the culture. Now, this will be wholly unsurprising to anybody who even has the tiniest bit of understanding about ska music and ska culture, but it actually has its roots in Jamaican ska and black soul music. The original roots of skinhead culture were very much that of working class solidarity and acceptance and uplifting of the roots of the music, that is, their Jamaican roots. Now, whilst the focus originally within this culture was on working class solidarity across the races, there were a few isolated incidents in London of white skinheads going about bashing. Now, their bashing focus was specifically Pakistani and South Asian individuals. This original aesthetic was very much accessible to the general working class, taking elements both of the pre-existing mod style and marrying it with elements of Jamaican rude boy culture. Elements would include a cropped or relatively short star-pressed trouser. These are the sort of straight-leg trousers with the pleat down the centre. This would eventually end up becoming more commonly cropped jeans, so denim, as denim became more accessible and more associated with the working class. Next element would be work boots, most famously, of course, Doc Martens, although they did not necessarily have to be Doc Martens. You wanted a durable steel-toed work boot that could hold up to days of work or you being on your feet all day walking around. With these boots, we have the introduction of lace code, although lace code isn't so much a thing, and there is some discussion as to how widely spread it was generally used. Later on, red laces, largely, particularly with the back boot, would come to be associated with the National Front in the UK, with white laces being associated with other white pride organisations. Most common lace colour with anti-racist skinheads was specifically yellow laces, and as with just about anything else, the purple laces often were associated with queer skinheads. When it came to shirts, there were one of two pretty popular options. The first was a button-down, specifically a button-down called the Arthur Black button-down, if you're looking just at the fashion element. A lot of these shirts could often come once again from work or from school uniforms. School uniforms are the default in UK in public school. The option of shirt, as with many punk aesthetics, would be a generally DIY band shirt or slogan shirt. Accessories weren't particularly a massive thing, but when they did show up, they were semi-frequently things such as ties or braces/suspenders, things which most people owned to help maintain and spruce up hand-me-down clothing. When there were piercings and the like, they were generally DIY, but not particularly big or flashy. Then we come to the hair. As the name suggests, skinheads quite often had buzz cuts or incredibly short shorn hair. Their hairstyles were often very choppy and might be asymmetrical, trying to subtly push against the conformist aspects of the 1950s and the 1960s. Gender was immaterial. You were just as likely to see a woman with a shorn head as a man. Now, unfortunately, with the growth of the National Front and other such racist working class movements, we start to see a co-opting of the aesthetic, although it does shift slightly. We start to see what, for all intents, I would call the Manchester black skinhead. Union Jack shirts, bomber jacket or leather jacket, braces which aren't worn up but are generally worn around the waist, studded belts, and the work boots specifically with the trousers tucked into them, and very, very skinny trousers. These racist skinheads are also known as boneheads. Here is an illustration of the time which helps describe them to you. Now, at the time, boneheads were gaining power and recognition within the mainstream in the UK. There was a spread of the skinhead and punk culture in the US in the 1970s. Over there, they found a way to marry themselves with the pre-existing racist and white supremacist groups. Skinheads became presented in the mainstream as a neo-fascist movement. Now, in response to this, an organisation called SHARP, or Skinheads Against Racial Prejudice, was formed. This was actually formed in the US, in New York City specifically, in the 1980s, 1987, and it was established as a way for skinheads to reclaim that identity and reclaim the original roots of it, which was within the working class black community, not within the working class white community. SHARP as a movement made its way back over to the UK with a Welsh oi band called The Obsessed, and they redesigned the logo based on the Trojan reggae logo of the Corinthian helmet. This logo to this day tends to be the one which is most heavily associated with anti-racist skinheads. This logo made its way to the rest of Europe eventually. Whilst this image is older, SHARP is very much an active movement in some spaces. It is worth noting that in the US it was a specific organisation, whereas in Europe it tends to be more of a body of thought, the way, say, Antifa is. It's worth noting that SHARP does engage in traditional forms of activism and violent resistance. Which brings us back to absolute Harley Quinn and the Red Hoods. Now, the Red Hoods are pretty clearly an anti-authoritarian hacker organisation and community group. What's interesting to me is the way that absolute Harley Quinn marries elements of more traditional and earlier skinhead aesthetics with some more modern choices. For instance, if we're working off the assumption that Harley Quinn is in fact still a teenager, a large portion of this outfit could easily come from a Gotham Academy uniform or the like. We have that black sweater, which could either be automatically a sweater vest or something which was modified. We have a classic tie and button down, and we have the cropped short trousers. Now, as I mentioned, denim does seem to be the more popular choice for a lot of anti-racist skinheads these days, although it is worth noting that if she is somebody who is still a teenager and this is old uniform wear, it makes sense for her to use what she has access to. Also have the Argyle here, which is an interesting choice. Obviously, Argyle isn't necessarily particularly associated with skinhead as an aesthetic. It is slightly associated with mod style, but more specifically, Argyle does tend to be associated with uniforms. The only part of her outfit which is incongruent with skinheads are these big old basketball boots. Whilst basketball boots were popular within certain elements of reggae subculture, they've never really been an element of skinhead culture. It is worth noting that sneaker culture is absolutely massive and more culturally prevalent, so it might make sense to that degree. Absolute Harley Quinn is pretty clearly a skinhead.